Hello, my name is Doug Sanders, professional golfer, and I'm trying to reach Randy Weekly. If I have the right number, please have him to call. Doug Sanders. Thank you very much. Bye.
Morning dew on the rolling green, clubs in the bag, I've got a dream. From one small town to the next tee box, a life on the road, chasing drives and shots. Fairways and highways chasing.
Well, good morning, everybody. That's an exciting opening to our Golfers Golf and Travel show for this Tuesday, 2 days after one of the most exciting U.S. Opens that we've seen in years. Congratulations to J.J. Spahn for coming back on the back nine after opening with a 40 on the front nine. What an amazing putt on the last hole. Incredibly, J.J. sunk over 400 feet of putts during the week with 64-foot, 5-inch putt, putting the nail in the coffin for the other competitors on the last hole. After a lengthy rain delay, he calmed himself and came out and just said, hey, what the heck, let's go fire some birdies. But congratulations to J.J. Spahn, our 125th year of the U.S. Open being played, and our champion for 2025. What an amazing, life-changing event for JJ. Basically, what he did in the back nine is actually historic. This is the second time in the final 9 holes by a U.S. Open champion where they shot 3 under. Incredible. Johnny Miller shot 31 in the final 9 holes of the 1973 championship. Spahn is the 5th player to win the U.S. Open and birdie each of the final 2 holes of the championship, joining Ben Hogan, Jack Nicklaus, Tom Watson, and John Rahm. And that's an amazing feat when you realize how hard those courses are, all the pressure in the world are on your shoulders. You're trying to win, of course, 65-foot putt. There's a lot of luck, but he still had to hit at the right speed. And like he said, that's all he was trying to do. And sometimes the hole gets in the way and you end up being victorious. Congratulations again to JJ and his wife and 2 beautiful kids. I'm sure they had a wonderful, life gets busy for a U.S. Open champion. He also jumps into, I think, the top 6 in the world, because early this year, if you remember, he was in a playoff with Rory McIlroy. But upcoming today, let me tell you what we got going forward. Golfers Golf and Travel can be found all over the internet. If you go to our Instagram page, we have hundreds of thousands of views coming in there. Our Facebook account, our Facebook page, go ahead and join that. It's just Golfers Golf and Travel. It's very simple. You can find us now on TikTok. I guess if TikTok's going to be around, I have never really got involved in that. So that's been kicking off too. But we also have 2 great Roku channels, Live Eco Style and Excited Minds Media, which are shows and travel shows and what we try to help people do with their travel destinations. And our main company, Live Eco Style LLC, where we celebrate what we call all the good things in life, which are golf, travel, dining, sipping, recreation, health, fashion, sports, and fun. We try to always leave a better footprint no matter where we go, and we always try to enhance golf a little bit, because that's how we got started. We've played on our team thousands of different golf courses over our life. Myself, I was trying to add it up the other day. Somebody asked me, I know it's well over 2,000, but it might be pushing 5,000. I just don't want to say. It's been a long, great career meeting great people all over the world, of course, around the United States. Living in the Midwest, there's just great golf that stretches everywhere here. And over the years, I've played, you can't even say most of the courses in Illinois, because they keep cropping up, but there's just some great courses: Illinois, Wisconsin, Indiana, Iowa, Minnesota. And then when we get the warm weather down in Georgia and the Southeast United States, I've spent a lot of time playing golf all through Florida. Robert McIntyre became the runner-up. What a great young man he is. He is one of he's a runner-up matches, the best U.S. Open finish by a left swinging player. Phil Mickelson, of course, finished second outright or tied 6 times in the U.S. Open, never being able to secure his Open championship. Brian Harman finished as a left-hander, tied second in 2017. Interesting statistic on Scotty Scheffler. Doing amazing to watch him come all the way back. Really, just keep plugging along. Not really with his best game, but he really came into contention. He missed a couple short putts that I saw through the week, and those little things, I'm telling you, they just eat you alive. But what's interesting is Scotty has failed to break par in each of his last 9 rounds at the U.S. Open. This week shooting 73, 71, 70, 70. Par is 70, of course, this week. And very, very interesting. It was just a great U.S. Open to watch, just thrilling. And this week, they're back to playing an elevated event, the Travelers. I think it's up in Hartford. Scotty and Rory are both ready to come back into action. The women are down in Frisco. They had a great tournament down there at the headquarters of the PGA. Going to be hot, 95 degrees. It's a cooker in Texas this time of year, and those the women are just fabulous to watch. They're going to hit a lot of fairways all week. They're just absolutely sensational. On the travel side, I did a little research because right now domestic travel is hot, but I wanted to make people aware if you're planning on traveling, you can, if you have the ability to get away in October and November. Over in Hawaii, they call it the shoulder season. Kids are back in school. It's hard for families to travel. So sometimes at that time of the year, it's a little bit easier to travel and a lot less expensive. What I did find, which is really interesting, is that I asked right now, what are the top 3 golf destinations in October? Golf destinations in October in Hawaii. And actually, they came up with places I've played. So it's pretty interesting. On Maui, and we're going to focus on that, Wailea and Kapalua are 2 areas of Maui. The Kapalua Plantation and Bay and the Wailea Gold and Emerald, played those many, many times. Beautiful destinations. But go on reddit.com, just plug that in. You're going to find some great deals. Oahu, top destination on Oahu is Turtle Bay. The Palmer Course and Ko'olina. Absolutely vast, expansive vistas that are just remarkable on the island of Oahu. And then on the Big Island, Moanalani and Hawaii, great golf destinations. And these are top shelf. Now, if you want to save a few bucks, and if you're going to go on a limited budget, this is what's exciting to me, because once you get there, you want to be outside. You don't want to be staying in your room. You want to be going to the beach, going to hike, enjoy the food, enjoy the fresh air. Of course, Hawaii is one of the healthiest places on earth, one of our healthiest states in the United States. And they're predicting right now, you can get airfares. October is what they say, the cheapest month, flying from Chicago O'Hare to Maui. There are flights right now for $497 round trip. And of course, United Airlines does have a direct flight. You have to look for it a little bit, but it's been on that flight. It's a beautiful flight, and it takes you right directly from Chicago directly to Maui. Most times you have to make a connection. That could be anywhere from San Francisco, Los Angeles to Arizona, actually even Dallas, Fort Worth, Denver. Most typically you're going to be catching an indirect flight, but that direct flight from Chicago is fantastic. But there are places to stay, and the Four Seasons Resort on Wailea is absolutely a top tier luxury resort, beachfront. Now, this is not the inexpensive place. Midweek rates are from $1,200 to $1,500 a night. Now, if you go up and you stay up at Kanapali, I offer a suggestion, go to orbits.com, plug in the dates that you want to be there, plug in for flight and stay and car. And I just found some multiple destinations, anywhere from $1,500 to $1,700 a person. That includes your airfare, your car, and your lodging. And just look and see how that they're rated, because most of these are rated 8 out of 10 stars. They're just great places. As I say, you have to remember, tragically, there was a fire on Maui in the recent past, and that area down at Lahaina still sparse, hasn't been completely fixed. But if you get into Kaanapali, one of the greatest beaches, I think it's absolutely wonderful to open up your window at night and listen to the lapping of the shoreline, because it is just magical and mystical what that sounds like. Over there in the Kaanapali Beach, first time I went there in 1978, I could not believe how uniform at night that the waves just rolled in and down, in and down. I just lay in bed for as long as I could stay awake and listen to it. But the island breezes, you have the beautiful island of Lanai off in the distance. And the sunsets in Hawaii, of course, are some of the best in the world. And that's what people want to go and enjoy. Great places to eat. We're going to get into that in our next show. But right now, upcoming, we have a great interview, second part of Robert Mills, who is an amazing individual I've known for many, many years. But he is a mountain climber, as we found out last week, where he's climbed 56 of the top 57 mountains in the United States. But we're going to focus on some. I asked him last week, I said, "Did you ever get in serious trouble with all those climbs?" And yes, he has. And what we're going to hear about is how easily it was on one of his trips up one of the mountains early in his life, where they almost died. Luckily, they made it, and he's here to tell us about it. So right now, let's go to Robert Mills and a great story. Just get a good cup of coffee or your favorite beverage and sit down and listen to this personal story with Robert Mills, and about how almost he bought the farm, mountain climbing, back in 1978. Just leave it at that. Anyway, sitting, taking all this in with another skill set that I do not have, Robert Mills, coming to us from his California existence.
Good morning, Randy, or good afternoon, or it's afternoon. Yeah.
Well, it is. It's a great day that we have here, and our days sort of run together. But how are you doing, Robert?
I'm doing fabulous, Randy. It's a beautiful day here, as it always is, in paradise.
Well, you do live there. As long as it doesn't fall into the ocean, everything's cool. You don't want to become that Nevada lakefront property, as they always keep talking about. But
not out of the question that might happen.
Robert's going to be talking today. He's a very distinguished gentleman that he's been on these podcasts before, which you all know. He's a mountain climber, and he is an advocate for the consumer, former attorney doing some of the largest class action suits in the world. But also today, he helps people as he gives tours in San Francisco, historic tours that are extremely, we're going to get into those in future podcasts. We've touched on them in past podcasts, but Robert is the walking encyclopedia of the world, having traveled to 63 countries, and that is why we are honored to have you on our Golfers, Golf, and Travel.
Thank you,
Robert.
Thank you. Honored to be here. Delighted.
Well, we're delighted to have you, and you look wonderfully happy. But I wanted to bring up on the travel part, because we always get people talk to us about, you always got the travel deals going. So right now, domestic travel is, people are leaning that way. And I'm sort of, I've been to Hawaii many, many times, as you have. I know it's not hard for you to jump over to the other islands, as, we have to fly over you to get to where, so you're halfway there and there frequently. But this October, November is what's called the shoulder season in Hawaii. And what that means is that people their kids are in school, so they can't travel. Yeah, it's awesome. So Hawaii is a little bit less popular. Not that it's less popular, populated, I think would be the right term. And Robert, where's your favorite spot in the islands? I know you've been there quite frequently.
I like Kauai and that area there on the Big Island. And I can go up on the big volcanoes and hike up there. And they have that beach there Mauna Kea, the hotel there, and it had one of the greatest beaches in Hawaii. You know, it's just semicircle. You can go out and it's shallow and clear and easy there. I like all the Hawaiian islands. I mean, I really enjoy them. I like Lanai. I like uh, Kauai, and of course Maui is, you know, you can't beat Maui. I mean, you know, I've been all over Maui and Haleakala up on the top, and it's a wonderful state. I really enjoy it. It's a great place to go in the winter, you know, or in the spring.
Yeah, it's got one of the volcanoes right now is throwing out lava like a fireman throws out water. It's, you know, just continuing to build that island. What people don't realize about the islands is that they're constantly moving toward Japan. So where the islands were formed are where the big islands being formed right now. And then there's another under the ocean island, and I can't remember the name of, but it's under the ocean that's being formed also, which will be the next one upcoming after the big island is done and moving toward Japan. But they're all moving at and forgive me, but there's enough movement, put it this way, that when they had the shuttle program, the landing strip at Oahu was actually an alternative emergency spot for the shuttle to land. And there was enough movement in the islands that they always have to readjust a little bit that GPS to get things to land. You know, it moves, it just simply moves. And it's enough movement that you know, they do. I mean, continental, you know, we've all heard that, you know, the continents were together at one time, you know, and they now separated. And that's why South America and Africa looks like puzzle pieces. But the continental drift moves at about the same rate that your thumbnail grows on your hand. So, so however much in a year that your thumbnail grows, that's how much our continental drift is. So over billions of years, that adds up to something, I guess. So anyway, I do. So did you say Kauai was your favorite island or the Big Island?
No, I think the Big Island is my favorite island.
Yeah.
And I like the eastern part of it there, the southeastern part or northeastern part where the Mauna Kea Hotel is there. You know, there's a whole range of resorts along that strip there that are just spectacular, and then you can drive over that into just some incredible wild areas to hike, or you can go up on the volcanoes and hike all over that area up there, and some spectacular views up there above the clouds, and it's breathtaking. I'm always drawn to mountains anyway.
Oh, of course. Well, that's what we're going to get to here in a minute. But anyway, I just want to let people know that in October, upcoming, on the island of Maui, from Chicago, the base rates in Chicago typically are from $900 to $1,400 just airfare if you're flying, you know, coach and pretty much standard fare. But right now, they're predicting in October on United, and they do have a direct flight from Chicago that you can take. It takes off about 10 o'clock in the morning. But right now they're about $494 round trip per person. Package on Maui, staying at a very nice hotel, and plus a car is running tax and tip about $1,400. I mean, it's incredible. Airfare, can't live at home for that.
That's bargain, Randy. That's you should snatch it up.
Yeah, 7 days. You know, I mean, that's right on the beach.
Right on the beach.
Yeah, and I suggest go to orbits.com, do your research, you know, look at what you're looking at, look at the recommendations. But there are just tons of places in October, and the beaches are empty. That's the cool part. I mean, the weather doesn't change. Weather is great. You get to see the whales start to come back in, and it's a great. I've been there at that time of year. Very peaceful. You don't have traffic jams going from one part of the island to the, you know, that hinge point that's between the you know, Kanapali and going to Wailea area. But the Big Island's great. How many different colors of beach do they have in the Big Island? Didn't they have like a rainbow of colors?
They do. They have black beaches, and that's a type of lava. You know, the more recent type of lava. It's got basalt in it, makes it black. and then you have some orange or tan beaches, and then you've got a few white ones, and so and there's a couple of pink ones. Have you seen the
Yeah,
pink ones? I mean, it's really quite remarkable, and they're really pink. I mean, they're not just,
right.
and um, I think that's a fascinating thing. And if you go to Wailea there, you can get some whaling excursions out. It will take you out where you can almost touch the whales, and that's really a great adventure too if you have time.
Yeah, the Pacific Whale Foundation, we actually went and did some trips with them, and there's some very stringent rules. So when you see these, like where the whales are next to the boats, they're not supposed to be anywhere close to the boats, but can't help it when the whales swim up and want to say hello. But it's sometimes, I mean, if you go in the spring to the Maui area, very fascinating to watch the whales. Best thing in the world is to drink some Maui or Big Island coffee and get up in the morning and watch the whales play in the beach. But anyway, let's get to the heart of this great, because I can't wait for this. Robert has been a mountain climber, a hiker, an outdoorsman all of his life. His dad got him into it. We found out last week. But climbing mountains, as I said, I'm going to leave that up to you, Robert, and your family. By the way, did you read that article this week about the gentleman over in the Himalayas that was gone for 9 days? They just found him in the last couple of days, got separated from his party.
That happens all the time. These people get lost, or you think they would freeze to death, they don't, and there's a lot of these bizarre stories like that. Um, and I'm going to drill on some of the do's and don'ts here. Maybe it would be helpful. We'll dance around that issue too.
Well, today, just to give you I mean, I can't wait to hear this particular presentation by Robert because it's going to talk about life defying, defining, and threatening situations Robert has experienced in his climbing career. So, Robert, it's all yours.
All right. Well, by way of further introduction, I'm a retired consumer class action lawyer, did a bunch of other things, but every Saturday morning, starting when I was in the second grade, my father, who was an engineer, who loved the outdoors, and he would take me up into the Appalachian Mountains. We lived in Morganton, this little town in western North Carolina. And he would take me up there, and there was this pair of side-by-side peaks called Table Rock and Hawksbill. If you know North Carolina, you'll know them. And they're side by side, and we climbed them a number of times. And then we climbed the other peaks up and down the Linville Gorge, including Short Off, which is this huge cliff on it. And my father's love of the mountains quickly infected me, and it led to a lifetime love of the mountains and nature and outdoors, which I still regularly pursue, and it never gets old for me. It's become almost a spiritual thing. I climb out into the wilderness, and I go up where you can watch the sunsets and the sunrises, and watch the stars, and listen to the wind in the trees. Have a campsite and build a campfire with an old friend, and then climb to the highest point where you're standing above everything. Look out on this vast landscapes. It continues to inspire me. And so I've climbed hundreds of peaks in the United States, including 57 of the 56 biggest, base to top. And I've climbed breathtakingly beautiful mountains in New Zealand and Argentina and Chile and Canada, Alaska, Switzerland, Italy, and France. And just a couple of weeks ago, as you saw from my Facebook post, Randy, I climbed two gorgeous desert peaks in Nevada back to back on separate days with a longtime climbing partner. And it was too snowy in the Sierras this time of year, so I had to go out there and get something that I could climb without being in deep snow. And as you can probably imagine, if you climb as many mountains as I have, you're eventually going to have some terrifying experiences. And I'm going to share with you on this podcast a couple of near-death experiences that I had. Now, even if you don't climb mountains and you don't ever imagine yourself ever being out there, don't want to be, I think you'll find these stories interesting and insightful, and they'll give you a view sitting in the comfort of your home. It will give you a view into this world, which you might otherwise never have access to. And if you are an outdoor person, especially if you're an outdoor climber or a backpacker or a hiker, you'll find these stories useful as cautionary tales, okay? Which is helpful to help you recognize and be prepared for hazardous conditions that I didn't even know existed. And I'm pretty experienced, and they almost kill me. and also to avoid the mistakes that I made and my fellow partners made that almost got us killed. So this podcast, I'm going to warn you about these mistakes, and I'm sure you probably don't even know these existed. I didn't, and we've never heard of them, and I've never seen them reported. Okay, but hopefully you'll benefit from this and even if you don't climb, there's a lot of background tales here that I mean of risks and the management of risks that I think you might find useful. So let's start with this distinction that mountain climbers and outdoor people use about the risk and hazards of the mountains. They divide the risk into two categories. There's subjective risks and objective risks. And the people that study this, they call it risk analysis, okay? And it's very helpful. They do it in industry and aviation. The same mistakes made over and over again kill people in industry, kill them in airplanes, that kill them in the mountains. They are trying to, so to get a handle on this, okay?
Robert, I've never had to do a risk analysis mountain climbing. The only climbing I do is in and out of bed. So I never do the risk analysis. Maybe I should do that, for climbing in and out of bed. But I find it amazing. I want to stop you there for a minute. You're participating in a sport where you do a risk analysis before you start. I think that's great. I choose golf. I've been hit by golf balls 3 times in
Well, I think, people should do a risk analysis. I mean, risk
For
analysis,
everything.
I mean, driving cars, flying
Right.
airplanes, any kind of risk thing. And it's very helpful to you to be modest enough and self, awareness enough to make
Well, I'm
these.
sure you do a great job of it. I don't want to downplay it. I mean, I know if I was never gonna happen, if I was gonna go mountain climbing with you, I'm glad you do that. I find it fascinating. I can't wait to hear more, and I don't mean to interrupt as I interrupt, but I hope people listen up to what you just said because I know the story is going to be harrowing. So continue on. And
All right,
please,
so there are.
please keep your clothes on during this part of the podcast. Now that's
Okay.
a hint to what's coming.
I'm going to tell you about taking my clothes off on another one. But the risks are divided by risk analysis into two types of risk. And I think it's a helpful distinction. Okay, there's subjective risk, and those are the risks that are caused by human error. They're mistakes, bad judgment. Okay, in other words, they're the fault of the people, the hikers and the climbers, not the fault of the mountain or the weather or dangerous animals. So included in this are things like climbing without adequate protection or equipment when the conditions warrant. For example, climbing without an ice axe or crampons on packed snow, which is the most common form of accidents in mountain. People go out there and they walk on the snow and they slide down and crash into this. This kills people every year all over the world, and people do it, and so it's the most common, fatality actually. And then continuing on into thunderstorms or into imminent nightfall without adequate provision, shelter, clothing, headlamps. The list of these kinds of subjective risks and the foolish things people do, as you might imagine, is a very long and sadly a very long list. But you get the point, okay? The other category of risks in the mountains is called objective risks. And objective risks are the inherent dangers of being on high mountains. It can't be avoided. They can be mitigated, okay? For example, you cannot climb under, big avalanche-prone areas after a heavy snow, okay? You can avoid that. That will greatly reduce this. And there are other objectives, they have nothing to do with, there's avalanches and rock fall that kill people in positions of apparent safety oftentimes, okay? I want to tell you an interesting. Objective risks are these things you can't do much about. I was going to tell you a story about that. In the silver rush, there was the gold rush in California. It ended. It only lasted about 5 years, and it was over. And they got all the gold. And then the silver rush began in 1859, and that went on for a while. But they needed dynamite, which wasn't invented, or explosives, until Alfred Naval invented dynamite in 1867. Didn't get it until 1870s, and that's when really the silver rush began. And so they built this town in what is now a Sequoia Kings Canyon National Park called Mineral King. And Mineral King was built in a position of relative safety. People look at that's not going to be, well, avalanches wiped it out again and again. And Disney came in 1967. Disney was going to make this into a ski resort. And another avalanche came along and wiped it out, knocked out the post office, the general store. And Disney
Wow.
says, this is not going to. So the point of that is that, these objective risks are much more broad and dangerous than a lot of people think. This happens, like you've heard of the Everest Base Camp getting wiped out by avalanches in positions of apparent safety, and it happens all over the Himalayas. And the same with Yosemite. There was a bunch of rocks that came down and killed a climber recently, and it was on a trail that hadn't had any rock fall since the last ice age. I mean, so you're never
Wow.
quite safe. So anyway, you need to have another form of objective, which is unforecasted storms. They can bring lower temperatures, visibilities, and there's a risk of hypothermia. Hypothermia is the medical term for freezing to death. Okay, and it's a very common form of death in the mountains. Okay, they call it hypothermia is called the killer of the unprepared. Okay, because high winds have this enormous impact. They cause wind chill, and they make things much worse. So oftentimes people will start out, sweating and climbing up in the sun and everything, and then all of a sudden the cloud's going to get dark. The wind picks up, and they're completely unprepared, shockingly unprepared. And regularly, this causes people to freeze to death. And people get lost in the mountains and can't get back, and they die because they're unprepared. They haven't taken the kind of adequate extra clothing and so forth that they need to. Okay, but that's a subjective risk in a sense, but the two kind of get mixed up there with sudden storms. The subjective part is not being prepared. So this podcast is going to help you with all of it. Okay, so I'm going to start out with this true, fascinating, I think, a real life story about a
Hey,
near.
Robert,
Yeah.
I'll tell you what, we have to pay the principles of the show. So we're going to have everybody come back right after this important message that we have coming out. So stay tuned, folks. This is going to get good. And we're going to give Robert some extra time. But I
That's
want
the
to have
story,
the full
Bill.
story. We'll be right back. All right. Talk to you soon.
Here's to the fathers who shaped the way, who taught us more than how to play.
Well, here we return, everybody, and strap on, because here we go. We're going to now find out Robert is going to share the rest of the story. So go ahead, Robert.
All right. I picked this first story. I have many near-death experiences in my airplane flying a million miles around North America, but I picked this story to start with because I think it's a bit relatable. It's not about being up in the Himalayas or in Antarctica or something. It's not about technical stuff. It's about a group of us that got together and made a series of blunders that I think are very identifiable, but still potentially lethal. In an outdoor adventure that is not in some exotic, So I think that way it's relatable. So this involves a mountain called Boundary Peak. Okay, Boundary Peak is 13,147 feet. It's the highest mountain in Nevada, and it sits like this jagged afterthought tacked onto the end of this long mountain range in California called the White Mountains. And it's real jagged and straight up, but the whites are just desertish and kind of gentle, but they're extreme, remote, desolate, waterless mountains, and they're entirely in California, except for this one little peak at the very end, which dips over into Nevada. Okay, and the whites have the White Mountain Peak, which is the third highest in California. So way back, okay, in the middle of winter in 1978, January 1978, to be exact, my then girlfriend and I. And a longtime climbing partner of mine and his girlfriend, and a fifth climber, a male friend, all decided to go mountain climbing together in the desert down in Death Valley. Okay, the boys called each other nicknames. Okay, I was Blue because I wore this blue jacket and blue, and my climbing partner was called Cue Ball because he was almost bald and his hair was white and he looked like a cue ball. Okay, and the other guy, he had this, we called him Buffalo Head. Okay, and Buffalo Head was we shortened that to Behead. Okay, and I'll call him that in this story. Okay, and we called him that because he had this enormous mane of hair, and I hate to say it, he more than casually resembled a buffalo. Okay.
Well, 1978 was all about hair, by the way.
1978, and the women didn't have nicknames.
Yeah.
So Boundary Peak was not on our itinerary initially. When we got down there, We camped in these campgrounds and we climbed these two spectacular, gorgeous, high gain peaks in Death Valley. One called Pyramid Peak, which is 6,700 feet. It's actually in the valley. And we climbed Tin Mountain, which is 9,000 on the western edge. And we camped in Mesquite Campground in the glorious National Park campground. And it's only 1,700 feet above sea level. And it's in the center of northern Death Valley. And the significance of that to the story is it wasn't cold there. Okay, it was fairly warm. Down in Badwater, in the southern end of the Death Valley, it's in the 70s in January. And so what this is it figured in the miscalculation on Boundary Peak. And B had carried his water bottles on these climbs in this backpack day pack. They had the water bottles were sitting outside of his day pack, and it was well above freezing, so it wasn't an issue. But it kind of lulled us all this false sense of security about that. So another thing is the temperatures in mountains all over the world, as you all know, gets colder as you get higher, right? And it's about 3 to 5 degrees Fahrenheit colder for every 1,000 feet you go up. Okay. And this means, and this is extraordinary in Death Valley because you have this area, the lowest in North America, and you have this escarpment up to 11,000 feet on Telescope Peak, which is next to look right down on Badwater. It's over 11,500 feet higher. Okay. And I've stood up there. You can look down, see the hottest place on Earth, and you look over here, not even 90 miles away, and you see permanent ice on Mount Whitney, the highest place. So you have the highest, the lowest, in California, that's extremes. So the summit of Boundary 13,147 is roughly also 11,500 feet above this comfortable base camp we had at 1,700 feet. So what that means is there would be this enormous temperature range of at least 35 and maybe as much as 58 degrees colder. And of course, it would be immensely magnified by the wind that blows up there much harder. So now we all knew about this, of course, but we just didn't. Oftentimes this happens, all of us, we just don't grasp the magnitude of what the challenge we're about to take on here by deciding to go and climb Boundary Peak in the middle of the winter. Okay. So we were excited. We set off, got in the car, hit it off, and we didn't have GPSs in those days. We had, or cell phones. So we just had these quad maps and compasses, and it was a whole different ball game. So we drove up to this abandoned ranch building. It's about a mile off Highway 6, US 6. US 6 crosses into Nevada. And right at the boundary where it crosses into Nevada, there's a great big house of prostitution. We call it the whorehouse, okay? And it had big red flashing lights you could see for miles and miles and miles. Nevada was legal there. And so, it was kind of an anchor for us because you could see it. It helped you orient you where you were, okay? And so we came in there, we drove up and we parked, and we above us is looming this huge, snow-capped white mountains and deep snow. And so we set out with our snowshoes over our shoulders and our big packs on, and we headed up out of this sagebrush creosote desert up into these western junipers and pinyon pines, and finally into this canyon after several hours, about over 8,000 feet. And there was a beginning of a ground cover of snow there. And so there's only about an inch or so there. And so we decided to stop there in the dark and set up camp. And we all set up our tents, and my girlfriend Debbie and I, we squeezed into my little 3-man mountaineer tent with all our gear in it. And the temperature there was 5 degrees, and it had gotten colder, and and we were just like, wait a minute, we just were not really psychologically prepared for that. So Cue Ball and I, we had these little Sphia stoves, these Swedish stoves called Sphias. They were feeble, compared to what we got today. And we sat there for a long time melting snow and making tea and melting up water, putting these Nalgene bottles to take with us up the mountain. But we put them in our sleeping bags to keep them from freezing. Okay. So we made some hot noodles and snuggled down and slept for a couple hours. Then we got up at 4 a.m. And brewed up some hot coffee and soup. So we jumped into our winter clothes, put our day packs on, and headed up with these big, heavy, clumsy snowshoes over our shoulders, and struck out in the darkness, and at that time, and with headlamps, well before the first light. So we climbed along in this rapidly deepening snow as we ascended up for hours, and until just before we reached the ridge line at 10 o'clock, there started to be light. And then as we got to the ridge line, about 10,000 feet, we turned right, and there, several miles away was Boundary Peak Soaring Massif, the top of it, and it was just stunning, and we turned, we head straight for it. And it was much colder on this ridge line, and there was no trees up there, so the wind was howling. And so both these women were freezing cold. Okay, they weren't dressed for sub-zero wind chilled, and so soon it was clear this is not going to work, and they made the decision. They said, we will go back to camp, and we'll wait for you there. Okay. Now we the guys were disappointed, but we understood the wisdom of it, and frankly, we were relieved by it because we were very worried what we'd gotten them into here. I mean, they were over their heads in this, and we knew it, and it was our fault. And so we gave them a big hug, sent them back down, said, "Follow our tracks back down to the tent. Wait, we'll be back soon." Okay? So off we went.
What could go wrong?
I'm sorry.
I said, what could go wrong?
What could go wrong? So
You're sending women back to follow your tracks. So they were capable of, you felt.
Well, they just followed the tracks back down, so it was fairly easy, and it was a fairly defined thing. So we felt
no animals that they could run into, grizzly bear or coyotes or anything.
Well, there's no coyotes in the deep snow up there, so we felt that was safe enough, and they made it down.
50-50, yeah, 50-50 shot. It's okay. My former partner used to say, life is 50-50. It's going to be good or it's going to be bad, one or the other. So
we'll be right back. Don't worry, just to be a little while. So the snow was not deep, so we put on our snowshoes, and we clopped along their snowshoes for a while, and then all of a sudden the ridge turned a bit, and the wind had come through that area and scoured off the snow. So we're now walking on this bare ground, blunk, 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 in these heavy snowshoes. And after a while, we looked way up ahead, we couldn't see it, so we took them off. And that was our first big strategic mistake.
Really?
We put them up in the trees so we could see them, and headed off down this relatively flat ridge toward the mountain. But then pretty soon we went around a few more turns, and the snow was back, but it was much deeper than before. And you probably saw this coming. Pretty soon we're wallowing in waist deep powder. I mean, it's soft powder. I mean, it was practically having to swim.
Can I ask you a question? Why didn't you turn around? I mean,
That's a very good question, Randy. You've gone to the heart of it. Okay.
Yeah.
Among the list of mistakes, that was probably the first. So we felt, well, we'll get over this. So we wallowed on, and then we should have turned around right then, okay, or should have taken them with us. So that our second mistake is we failed to do what the risk analysis would tell you. You have a hard date to turn around, hard turnaround time. Okay, every mountain climb actually has this. Okay, it gets to be 5 o'clock or 3 o'clock. Where we are turning around no matter what. If not there, we're turning around. Okay?
Gotcha.
It's hard to do that. Okay, and the third and the really catastrophic blunder that we made is we failed to notice that Behead had his water bottles in his outside pockets. Okay, and I don't know why he put them there. We had them wrapped in our jackets down in our day packs. And so what do you know? You know what happened? They quickly froze. And so we arrive at the base of Boundary Peak at this pass. There's this big deep thing, and it goes right up. And there's the summit. And so we get there, and Behead, which has not been drinking his water like he should have, he takes his water bottle out. It's a heavy brick of solid ice. Okay, and so is the other one. Okay, now that was our fourth mistake, Randy, which you've already anticipated. We should have immediately turned back then. Okay, so these mistakes, they compound on you as you go along here. Okay, but Behead said, "Oh, I'll be fine. Don't worry about it. That's nothing. I'll just nibble some of this snow. You guys go ahead. It won't take you long. You just go out there and come on right back, and we'll go down." That was another mistake. Okay, and so I think altitude sickness played a role in his and also peer pressure. He didn't want to appear to be a sissy or something, and he knew he was screwing things up. But he insisted, I just go on up there. I'll wait right here. Go on, please. So Behead and I, Cue Ball and I rather, now deeply under the spell of summit fever. This is something that mountain climbers get when they get where they can see, and they've been doing for days, and they do reckless things. They ignore risk because there it is, and they can just taste it. Okay. And so we ignored his condition. We ignored the enormous risk and the bad judgment of leaving him there. And instead, um, looked up at this glorious peak, okay, and made our fifth mistake, which was we misjudged how far and how long and how hard and how difficult it was and how long it's going to take us, okay. And further, the snow was really, really deep up there in these drifts and steeper rock, and so it took way, way longer. So we took off, pushing upward fast as we could, which wasn't fast at all, okay. And after hours of struggle, okay, we finally reached the summit at about 3:45, which in January is dusk. And there was this huge storm coming from the west. You could see it on the western sky, full of storm clouds heading straight at us. The wind had already started to pick up. So Cue Ball and I quickly saw on the summit register, and we start plunging back down. But then we encountered that as you put your foot out, it would fall through this snow into these cavities, air pockets, and you could twist an ankle. And that slowed us down. And then, so it was just taking us way long. We finally reached Behead down at the pass there. By this point, it was hours in the dark. It was pitch black dark, and the wind is howling, and it's snowing. And we got to him. I was horrified by his condition. Okay, he was profoundly dehydrated. He hadn't drank. You can't drink this snow. I mean, you can get it freezes you anyway. He was altitude sick. He was exhausted. He was deeply hypothermic. He was shivering uncontrolled. He could barely talk. And he had sat by this rock on the ground for hours in the open, in this open wind and sub-zero chill, So we grabbed him up and stood him up and pep talked a little bit. And we all headed down this long, long, long trail down to this ridge-covered ridge. And soon we were wallowing in the deep powder again. And we had to help him along and pull him and everything. And it slowed us and slowed us and slowed us. And so I could see he was deteriorating. And so I was in a panic. I began to make contingency plans in my head of what we were going to do if he just gives out and collapses. What are we going to do? We cannot carry him back. It's too deep inside. And so the horror settled in on me that if we left him there, he would die very quickly. And then, the alternative was that one of us had to go down to the camp and get, stoves and camp, a tent and sleeping bags and come back. And then the reality began to dawn on me that, could either of us, in the condition that we were in, have the strength to go miles and miles and hours down to Kamoa? The answer was no. And honestly, no. And so no matter how horrible and unthinkable the consequences were, no amount of willpower could overcome that, So I had a tiny tad of water left, and I gave it to Behead, and so did Cue Ball. And it wasn't nearly enough. It deprived us of some of the hydration we needed to get along. But we somehow dragged him along and managed to get back down to the ridge line. And then this house of prostitution, the whorehouse we called it, which was out down on highway, you could always see it up there. And it gave you this orientation that it's surprising how valuable that was, because it tells you kind of where you were. As you zig and zag in the dark, you forget which way you're going. There it was. You knew the tent is there, the mountain is here, the route is here. Suddenly it disappears in the clouds or the storm coming in. Okay, we were suddenly swept up in this fury of this storm, and you couldn't see anything. You couldn't hardly see in front of you this dense, opaque clouds sweeping past us. You could see them, and it started to snow heavily. Okay, and soon we couldn't even see a few yards, and we're stumbling along in this howling fog and wind. And I had this deep sense of dread and disorientation. I couldn't quite sure where I even was. And I thought that, catastrophe was pretty close at hand here. So we continued on now. We face a new problem, okay? Which of these trails coming up to the ridgeline was the trail we came up? This wind had covered up our tracks, okay? And this was way before GPS. Now, Randy, you cannot get lost in the mountains. I mean, you cannot get lost. You know exactly where you are. But then, no. And we only had these ridiculous paper maps. They wouldn't tell us what we need to know. And so there were these trails, I mean, these open gullies that were coming up to the ridge line. And, which one did we come up?
Huh.
And so I thought that a particular one was the right one. And I said, cue ball, this is it. And he said, no. And so we shouted at each other. But he, over this roaring wind, was shouting at each other. And cue ball was sitting there. I mean, he had this glazed look on it. And we're shouting back and forth. Time is wasting. So finally, cue ball was so certain, and I wasn't certain he was wrong. And I thought, well, even if he is wrong, if we get down below the tree line, we'll get out of the wind to some extent, we'll get out of the snow, and we can maybe go down to the highway and get help, or hike up to the whorehouse for all, or we get, I mean, at least something. It'd be safer together than to separate, So I went along, and I didn't want us to split up. Okay, so B had continued to deteriorate. And I was surprised that he was even walking at all, And if he had not walked, who knows what would have happened here? We'd have had, but he began to hallucinate. He was talking incoherently. He didn't know where he was. And so we held him by the hand and we kept him going. And finally, we came to this path, this gully down into the forest. And cue ball shouted into this roaring wind, "This is it!" And I doubted it, but I was too weak to argue. So I just followed him down, and about 100 yards down this gully in the snow, out of the wind there, down in the forest, there was a footprint in the snow. And I went over and looked, and it was a footprint up the hill. And I looked down in it, and I could see my distinctive tread of my shoe.
Wow.
It just hit me like a ton of bricks that we were on the right thing. And then another thing grasped me that I realized that up at this point, I thought somebody's about to die. This is really, really dire. But suddenly it dawned on me after seeing this, we're actually going to make it, And so at this point, it was downhill and the snow was getting shallower. And I had enough strength to come out of it. And it wasn't that far. We could just, if he collapsed, we'd just grab each arm and drag him to the camp. So I knew we were going to make that. So we arrived back in camp, and it's midnight. Okay, we left at 4 a.m., 5 a.m. It's 19 hours earlier in the pre-dawn darkness. And so I go over to my girlfriend's and I, Debbie, and instantly there's this emotional voice that answers back, and you could just feel that she's thrilled beyond words, because she thought that they're not coming back. I mean, something's happened to them up there. They're supposed to be back a couple of hours, 3-4 hours. And now it's been, it's been all day and into the night, and she was trying to figure out how she's going to initiate a rescue, So we put B in a sleeping bag in a tent, gave him several cups of tea from the girls' water bottles, and some candy and snacks and dried fruit. Then I was designated as the water finder, the snow gatherer, So I went out and scooped up snow. It was this deep, I'd scoop up a spoonful into these water bottles until I fill one. I'd bring it back and give it to them. They'd give me an empty water bottle. I'd go out and I'd fill it again. And we just did this. I went back and forth all night. I mean, there were 5 of us. And the 3 guys, we needed at least a quart to get even. And the women wanted, and we need something to get down. And so I spent the whole night practically going back and forth in a blizzard in the wind, bringing this thing. So finally we had enough water, and these feeble Svias had melted up, made tea for us. So I jumped in my sleeping bag. We slept a couple of hours, then we got up, broke camp, and came down the desert. The blizzard was starting to dissipate a bit, and then we got to our cars without problem, and we drove to Laws, this tiny little historic town. You can see it's near Bishop. It was the first town we came to, and it was a cheap motel. It was open then. So we got a room with 2 beds, put B-head in his sleeping bag on a paneled floor, and the 2 couples got into the 2 beds, and we slept for most of the rest of the day. Got up at night, went to a restaurant, came back, slept again. They got up and drove home, okay, and safely. So there's some takeaways here. Let's talk about it. Okay, first, when you have a group situation like this, especially in a challenging thing, it's important for the leaders and for everybody to always be sure that everybody's okay, that they're bringing what they got to bring, and Cuba and I were deeply distracted by our girlfriends, okay, because we were both acutely aware that they were inexperienced and were relying on us, and to look out for them, and we irresponsibly led them up into a situation where they were clearly way over their heads, unprepared, unequipped, facing inadequate clothing in sub-zero temperatures, without the stamina for an 18-hour climb. It's on us, okay? And So we were focused on that, and we were so focused on it, and because we were lulled from the earlier climbs with cue ball, we weren't lulled into looking out for him. Had this fall, and we would have noticed he was carrying his water bottles in. It was right there in front of us. We didn't notice it. Another huge thing, and so we misread this. We failed to take into account this challenging winter differences between a winter climb in the desert with no snow at 9,000 feet in Death Valley, where it's 40s and 60s, to a sub-zero climb at high altitude and deep snow at 13,000 feet. Okay, day and night difference, and we failed to take that into account. And we also failed to adhere to the normal safety mountain recalls. We didn't have this moment when we should have checked everybody first to see everybody was covered and had their water possibly. And we should have had the predetermined turnaround, no exceptions, and we should have turned around the moment we realized the stuff was frozen. And David and I grossly miscalculated the up and down. We should have turned around then. But there's a subtle lesson here, and that is that when you go from sea level up to 10,000 feet, there's these symptoms of altitude sickness that are oftentimes difficult to recognize. You have the obvious ones like vomiting, loss of appetite, failure to realize you're dehydrated, mental confusion, physical weakness, and sometimes outright hallucinations. But there's more subtle. There's this bad judgment that comes with high altitude, and absent-mindedness. And it's very hard to detect that in others, especially in yourself. And we should have taken that into account, and we should have noticed that Behead was not drinking his water and noticed the water bottles. But that was because of absent-mindedness and some altitude effect on us. Okay, and of course, we should have immediately recognized the thing and turned around. But the stress and deep distractions of the climb, we didn't do what we should have done. Okay. So everybody on a climb like this, or anything, not just a climb, but any kind of challenge thing, everybody should check on everybody else at all times. At the outset, to see you're bringing the essential things. And when I go climbing with guides, they sit down and they take everything out and show me you got this, and this. And they pick it up. So you don't, wait, I forgot my whatever, That doesn't happen because they checked it to start with, okay? And are you cold? Are you altitude sick? Are you in distress? You ask people that. You see how they're doing. We didn't do that. So there's the takeaways from my mistake, a cautionary tale to you, dear listeners. You could profit from this, and not just in these situations, but you can generalize out what happened to us in general in life, to situations where these failures may be helpful to you, so that you don't make the same mistakes we do. And we got lucky this time. We got very. Behead could have just collapsed early on, and we wouldn't have been able to get him out. And he would have died, and it would have been on us. And I would have carried that the rest of my life. So learn from my mistakes,
Well,
happy climbing.
I'm glad you're here. It's a wonderful tale. And it, to me, it's like, so in 78, a lot younger, a lot more, did you have an alpha male on the trip, or was it 3 alpha males that,
There were probably 2 alpha males, Cue Ball and I, and it was sort of not so much alpha. By default, we were the ones that had a lot of experience, and the others didn't. And so we naturally assumed that role, but we're in that role. Let's put it this way: we were in that role, but we did not assume it properly.
Right.
We should have formally, in regular mountain climbing with guides, regular mountain climbing, somebody is designated the leader. And that's one of the safety features. And what the leader says is goes, and you don't argue with him. Right. He's the dictator. And this is another safety feature. We did not designate ourselves as the leaders and the alphas, and recognize that with that comes responsibility. We should have taken into account these things. You should have had everybody say, let me see what you got here. Do you have enough water?
Right.
You're storing your water. It's below zero and your water bottle's out and it's going to freeze in 15 minutes. What are you doing? We didn't do that.
Anyway, Robert Mills, appreciate today. I'm glad you survived. Hope to see you next week. And death-defying experiences. All right. And for Golfers Golf and Travel, this has been a production of Distillery Media, LLC, and Live Eco Style, LLC, copyrighted, of course, in 2025. And guess what? July This year is our 10th anniversary of Live Eco Style, and there's going to be a big celebration coming up around July 15th. So anyway, old Uncle Randy for Robert Mills. Y'all have a good day. Bye-bye.